is a philosophical position that places.
ちょっと暑いっすね。Humanism is a philosophical position that places the dignity of the individual at the center of its movement. A primary principle of humanism, I don't need to spell that for you, do I? Okay. A primary principle of humanism is that human beings are rational and have an innate predisposition for good. Although humanism is associated with the beginning of the Reformation, the humanist philosophy was not new when it became popular in Italy during the Middle Ages. In fact, according to the ancient Greek philosopher Protagoras, mankind was the measure of all things. This idea was echoed by Socrates, and he said, "Many are the wonder of the world, and none so wonderful as mankind." This is classical humanism. Man as the ideal at the center of all creation. Even the ancient Greek gods were viewed as resembling man both physically and psychologically. And in a sense, isn't this a personification of deity and just an exalted human being? And such a precise rediscovery and translation of classical manuscript that coincided with the English printing press around the mid-15th century, which were the catalyst for the humanistic movement throughout Europe. The clergy and upper classes participated in the rediscovery and dissemination of classical literature. Humanism became popular among theologians and scholars, and soon set the stage for the Renaissance. This one a spell. Does anyone remember the meaning of the word Renaissance? Reverse, renewal, renewal. Renaissance literally means rebirth, and it referred to the return to ancient Greek and Roman art and literature, which, like all things in human tradition, they were measured by human standards, and returned to the classical principles of harmony and balance. In the field of architecture, we see both religious and secular buildings styled after ancient Roman designs, with mathematical proportions and a human scale. A scale that contrasted with the medieval Gothic building of the previous era. Public works such as bridges and aqueducts from the Roman occupation were repaired, restored, or rebuilt. In the sculptures of the period, nude figures were modeled in life-size images with true proportion, and it was also at this point that realism became the standard for painting, with the preference for a naturalistic setting and the placement of figures in realistic proportion to those settings. It was also evident that the portrait tended to be more personal and authentic, and artists even produced self-portraits at this time. Remember, the figure in painting of previous era tended to be over the world, but the Renaissance painters placed recognizable human beings in this world. In music, there was an effort to human ear and melodies that were compatible with human voice. In addition, music lessons became more widespread as a source of education and enjoyment. Dancing increased in popularity, with a concurrent trend toward music that had rhythm, invited movement as a pleasurable activity. And that's why Latin became so important. Yes, so Greek and Latin became important as a tool for scholarship, and classical Latin became the basis for an international language of the intellectual throughout Europe. To be true to humanism and all it represented, it was necessary to be knowledgeable about and faithful to ancient philosophies as expressed in their writing, and how best to explain them then in original languages. By the way, Latin as a universal language for clerics and the aristocracy, this encouraged the exchange of ideas on a wider scale ever before, and legitimized in the sense the presumption that mankind was at the center of all things, all means possible for individual scholars to make a name for themselves and establish their place in the history of mankind. Well, it was at this time that a close association or almost a partnership was forged between art and science. Indeed, to be precise, sculptors and painters studied the human form. In fact, they became anatomers. The one Leonardo da Vinci, which demonstrates the geometrical proportions of the human body, and of course Alberti in his architecture, sculpture, and painting, he emphasized the study of mathematics as the underlying principle of all art, whereas the artists had considered themselves craftsmen in the Middle Ages. The Great Renaissance artists viewed themselves as intellectuals, the philosophers, if you will, of humanism. They were designing the world for human beings to live in and enjoy, one that was in proportion and in harmony with mankind. And so, perhaps you can see why the so-called Renaissance man emerged. Okay, but exactly what is the definition of a Renaissance man? I know it means a very talented person, but good question. Sometimes we use these terms without really defining them. So, I would say that the Renaissance man would be talented, as you said, but would also have to demonstrate broad interest in both art and sciences. The quality that most involved in the Renaissance was the extraordinary, maybe even universality of talent in diverse fields of endeavor. After all, this quality proved that mankind was capable of reason and creation, that humanism was justified in placing man in the center of the world, as a measure of all things in it. With the humanistic philosophy as a justification, scholars would interpret the ancient classics and to reasonable conclusion, a very new, more secular society built on individual human effort. It was not difficult for the Renaissance man to make the leap of logic from classical humanism to political humanism, which encouraged freedom of thought, and indeed even democracy within both the church and the state. But that is a topic for another day. で、わからなかった。単語を調べましょう。プレディスポジションとは何ですか？性質傾向。へえ。知らなかった。にゃんこちゃんは猫ちゃんになっちゃうんだって。 猫ちゃん.猫ちゃん. 냥. 냥. Okay.